Hi, welcome back to Neighborhood News. I'm Susan Sedensky, the Executive Director of the Pawcatuck Neighborhood Center, and on my show today is Dr. Jean Renz, who's the Vice President of the Board of Directors for the PNC. Jean, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to start by asking you how long you've been on the board.
It'll be 6 years this year. I started as the request of a longtime president of the board, Reverend Josh McClure, and the scouting person he had, Leslie, and they asked me after an exercise class to help out, and I said yes.
And I believe you had just retired, is that correct, at that time?
About a year before.
A year, oh, so you were still working?
No, but I mean, I had retired a year before, but I hadn't come on the board till later.
And prior to your retirement, you had been a dentist in?
I had been a dentist in an office about, half a mile from the center.
Okay, right. And so since you've been on the board, and it's only been a brief time, you've done a lot in 7 years, Jean. What are some of the major accomplishments that the board has achieved since you've been on the board?
Well, the major accomplishment, I feel, is the generator with the built-in cooler and built-in freezer that we use to store and keep healthy food. We had had a long time boxed food pantry, and Josh McClure's dream was to have a facility that would allow more fresh foods because they're more healthy. Yes. And he had the vision of should we or shouldn't we do a generator, and then he said we need the generator, and that led to investigating coolers and freezers. And that led in turn to building coolers and freezers and raising the money to do that. And then when that project was finished, we were in the process of interviewing you for the board, for the executive director spot. And one of the applicants for the executive director spot asked the question, what's happening with the garden? And at that point, I hadn't really paid too much attention to the garden. I had been up to my ears with square footage and cubic footage and numbers of freezers and age of freezers and so forth.
Right.
And so I went out and looked at it and went into the pantry and asked some questions. And they said, well, Paul can't till it. I said, Paul can't till it? Who's Paul? And they said, Paul Songdahl. And I said, well, I knew Paul. He'd been a friend and a patient. And so I called Paul and I said, what's going on? He says, oh, it's a mess. I'll wreck my tiller if I go in there. I said, okay. The men downstairs told me that we have school children coming on Monday to plant. Oh, is that so? So I spent the next 2 days clearing the place out so Paul could till, so that the children, when they came on Monday, could plant.
Well, and I think we actually have pictures of that. When you first started your endeavor in the garden, it actually looked like grass. You had to remove a lot of the grass in order to get land that you could plant seeds in. And why was the garden not taken care of for a little while?
Well, a long-time volunteer, Frank Terranova, had taken upon himself for 20 years to build this garden and raise vegetables for the neighborhood center.
Right.
And unfortunately, he became no longer able to do it, first becoming sick and then dying. And so when I got it and saw it that week, I endeavored to try and fill some of his very big boots and grow food for the new cooler, thinking that, I can fill this cooler. Dreamer that I was.
Well, the thing is that, I mentioned this a lot on the show, that when we're asking for donations, we ask for non-perishable items. And so people tend to think that that's what a food pantry gives out, that we give out beans and rice and cereal, which we do. But we give out a significant amount of fresh meat and vegetables, seafood, and fruit. And we couldn't do that if we didn't have that walk-in cooler. And that was kind of the first step. And then I think you getting the generator was to make sure that we would never lose all of that food.
Well,
is that right?
Well, when we had the experience with Hurricane Sandy, or
Okay.
whatever you want to go, Superstorm Sandy,
Right.
there were parts of the town of Stonington and Westerly that were without power for more than a week. And folks that lived there, some of them could cope with that, but many of our less fortunate can't.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I think, was Josh McClure's focus. How do I make sure that we never have people hungry?
Right.
And so the cooler and the freezer became part of that. If we're going to do this generator,
Right.
let's do it.
Right. Right.
Let's look into the future and see what we can do. So that's when it was built. We've had some challenges trying to figure out how to best use them. For example, in the cooler, well, it's one thing to have a 38-degree refrigerator, but a 38-degree cooler that someone has to go in frequently, not only the heavy door, but it's not a very good thing to do. So the wonderful volunteers down there have done a great job of adjusting what the original thoughts were and making it possible to get food. For example, the backpack program that you're going to mention later, they give out 150 different jugs of milk. Well, to cart this, open that door that many times in the course of a day, it's not a good thing financially, but it's also not a good thing for the volunteers. It's exhausting.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned the volunteers, because we have 300 volunteers who donate their time every year to the PNC, but basically we have 100 who are our core, and most of them are well over age 55. It's a wonderful thing to do in your retirement, to be able to come and to help people. You and I were talking a little bit before the show, and you've been a volunteer in many different capacities throughout your life. But until you worked for the PNC, you were telling me that you never realized the scope of the number of people in our community who come for food. 1,500 is the number of people who come routinely to the PNC, and 300 kids each week come in the backpack program. Why do you think that you and other neighbors of ours don't understand the scope of people who are in need of food right now?
I think at this point in time, mothers and fathers are so stressed to be parents and to each hold down one or two or three jobs that the world around them is sometimes missed. And Pawcatuck, when I first set up my office, as a dentist, the man setting me up said, "You realize, of course, this is the 7th poorest town in the state of Connecticut. I don't know how you'll make it here." And that was my first indication that there were going to be some things for me to be concerned about. And over the years, I've gotten to know the community better. And there are people that are well-to-do, but when people say Westerly, they think Watch Hill, or they think Stonington Borough. And those are wonderful communities with tremendously generous people in them. But for the most part, they have, over the years, been a transient community, one that doesn't spend 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year here. Mm-hmm. And all of the nonprofits in our area have a great deal of thanks to give to them, because they are generous in terms of dollars. The people who live in Westerly Pawcatuck are generous in time. Mm-hmm. Now, they give dollars too, but it's a different level of engagement. It's the human level of engagement where people actually see. One of the biggest indications of that is in Thanksgiving and Christmas, the PNC gives out large numbers of holiday baskets. Well, you know, you have a vision of what holiday baskets are, But people don't really have a vision of, well, it's turkey. Yeah, okay, fine. But it's fresh potatoes donated by a local company. It's carrots and mashed potatoes and dessert and other various components of what makes a nice Thanksgiving meal. Well, how many do you give out? 30? 50? Oh, it's hundreds.
500.
It's hundreds. So then you go there on the Saturday before Thanksgiving and you see these very engaged teenagers in a conga line with boxes full of food going in an hour and a half. They're filling 600 boxes of foods for their neighbors. It's not only a wonderful experience for them because they have fun, but it's a wonderful experience for them because they get some recognition of what's going on around them, that not all their classmates have what they have.
Right, and also classmates who are participating in the program also realize that they're certainly not alone, and that our hope is that it will be a transition, that maybe you're in a situation where you need some food, but you may not later. And another piece of the PNC is that we do have a caseworker who helps people with SNAP benefits and heating and other utilities and other types of programs beyond the food. But I want to get back to the garden, because once you put that generator in, you then had this idea of filling it by yourself, I guess, with fresh vegetables.
Well,
how big is the garden, by the way, at the PNC?
It's hard to measure. It's 60 by 80, so that's 4,800 square feet.
Okay.
We have 14 raised beds, none of which existed 3 years ago. We built our first bed in 2000.
So this picture right here, what's this, Gene?
This is the garden on July 28th, 2017. Mm-hmm. That's looking southwest. That was supposed to be planted a certain way, and it was, but you're looking at a lot of beautiful eggplant. And on the other side, there were 100 cherry tomatoes, the bane of my existence. My back barely survived that. I had no clue of what was going in the garden because everybody came and planted it when I wasn't around. The left side of the screen is a picture of where everything basically that succeeded was eggplant. Everything else, all the beans died. The tomatoes were non-contributory because they were small and they rotted before I could get them picked. It was quite an experience to learn what would grow and not grow. In the background are pepper plants that I think produced 13 peppers the whole summer. They decided they would not cooperate with my
So this was not a very successful, or it was
awful.
Successful. Okay.
It was
now
awful.
let's Frank, could we forward to, this is now the second year?
So after you came on board, people had asked me, volunteers, do you think you could build a raised bed? So I went to a local gardener, and they said, well, we've got these hoops that we can give you. You can't see them on the screen. And so you and I put together a plan, went before the town, because this is town land, and I ended up being held up till December, so I couldn't build it. And we had a February thaw, and that's when I built it. It was 6 by 17 feet. And as you'll see in the screen, those beds are 4 by 16 because that's more generous use of wood without waste. I found those corners to allow me to get depth, and we found that everybody liked them. The volunteers were especially happy about them.
Why is it better to have a raised bed than not?
Because the soil there stinks.
Oh, okay, so it's all about the soil.
So
okay.
The interior of the garden, the exterior around the fence, you have gravel at about 4 inches.
Okay.
And so on the next screen of the 2019, you'll see that we have 13 beds built there, and they have been an interesting adventure because even though the soil sources, either Earth Care Farm in Charleston, Rhode Island, or the Stonington compost, are the same sources, the difference in fertility is extreme. So in this lower right-hand corner, there's a raised bed that produced 0 last year until I got upset and took all the dirt out of it, sifted it, and put in vermiculite and peat moss. And within 10 days, I had plants bigger than the other end of the garden that had been in there for 2 months.
And you also try to put in very varied vegetables so that our clients can really try some different things, correct?
Well, the rule in our house by my boss, my wife of 51 years, is that your plate should be colorful.
Okay, good.
She felt that children would be more apt to eat food if they were attracted visually to it. So as a result, we've had white and purple eggplant. We've had red, yellow, and orange carrots. We've had chard that's red and green. We've had yellow, black, and red tomatoes, and so on.
Wow. And even just mentioning vegetables like chard, some people haven't tried that before.
Well, that's one of our deficiencies right now. We have to figure out a way to educate folks on how to use it because they don't know.
Right.
And it was brought home to me how good it could be. We were on a trip this past summer, and chard was cooked in olive oil and sea salt to go along with a very good fresh fish. And ooh, we got to get this recipe. Okay. So the hope is that now that I've gotten the building part of my idea basically done, how do we create small menus to help?
Well, we actually do. A lot of our volunteers will give suggestions of recipes, and on February 19th, we will be having cooking classes offered at no cost to intergenerationally. It will be our seniors and also parents with children who are not school-aged. It's the Yellow Farmhouse is the nonprofit that is running those classes. And so anyone who's watching right now, anytime after February 19th, these will be on Wednesdays at 11:30. You're welcome to call the PNC and come and try some of these cooking classes because our goal is to try fresh vegetables and very simple ingredients that even children could make. So that's been a big goal at the PNC.
Well, that's a follow-up to a class that you had last summer where you had a nutritionist come in for people who have type 2 and type 1 diabetes to help them learn how to use fresh food to keep their blood levels in the proper level. Right. It's a wonderful idea, and because oftentimes it is just an educational thing. It's not that they can't, but they just don't know.
I think that we're all learning so much about food and where does our food come from. I know that just in recent years, I've been eating different types of food than I used to in the past. I was wondering, as a dentist, how have you seen a correlation between healthy teeth and food?
Well, we now know, thanks to some really wonderful research, that the mouth is a mirror of your soul and your body. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes people who are living unhealthily, their mouth will show such.
Right.
For example, people who have high acid diets, their teeth erode and they lose enamel. You'll see those commercials many times on television in the course of a day. Well, wouldn't it be better to just get off the acid foods and eat foods that are more kind to your mouth?
Right.
So, yeah, the knowledge expands. It's just slow to get out to the people around, but the mouth definitely has you can tell somebody who's dehydrated looking in there. You can tell people who have deficiencies in certain vitamins in there. Mm. So, yeah, as a dentist, we're much more in tune with nutrition than we were when I first started in 1970.
And that's why it's so important to go to the dentist, because you have someone looking at your mouth and seeing your whole body by examining you that way. When should people first bring their child to a dentist?
Well, the road answer is 3, but every parent knows their child well. And I have grandchildren that were ready at 2, and I have grandchildren that aren't ready now at 10. It's an individual process. How do they handle strangers? When I was doing it, the goal for my suggestion to the parent would be, bring them with you. Bring one at a time, and when your appointment is done, we'll put them in the chair and introduce them to these willy whistle and the squirt guns and all of that stuff and the sounds, so they're not forced into an emergency situation and all this is scary, the bright lights and so forth. So 3 is a good answer, but there are boys that won't be ready till they're 5 or 6, and there are girls that most likely are ready at 2. And I guess the counsel I would give parents is just stay away from taking anything to bed. You don't eat in bed as an adult, and you shouldn't eat in bed as a child. So don't drink. You think a milk bottle is great, and you'll take care of the child, but it just makes it worse. And milk bottle syndrome is a terrible thing to see in this day and age. And it does happen still, but you don't want to see it.
Right. So now going back, thank you for giving me that information about because we didn't plan to talk about that, but it's such useful information. And the whole point of this show is just to let folks know what is out there for them, for resources, and in addition, how you can volunteer. Oh, here's a picture of you planting with some local kids. Now, let me ask that question. Do you have to be a master gardener or have a lot of experience gardening in order to come and help out at our garden?
No. I have 3 wonderful volunteers. One, Sarah Whalen, is on our board and is a nurse. The other 2 are retired men. One actually had a business in gardening in Maine, and the other has an acre garden in his backyard and is a high school classmate that I've known for 60 some odd years. So their expertise has certainly been welcomed by me.
Right.
John Snyder, who's helped us a lot, he built a wash station over this winter that we've just installed. It'll be ready to go come springtime. David Pansera, he's the former director of the library in Westerly. He and I are compiling a planning of each of those beds, a double planting so that we are pulling out when we're putting stuff in so we can get 2 crops in the course of a year. So those are the knowledge birds, but when people come, they can expect the kind direction of how they can help and what they can do. Picking, July is really a busy time for us because we have so much going on. So certainly at that time it's great. We have the children coming from schools early June to plant stuff that we will organize for them, and David, John, and I will have started plants probably in the middle of March, early April, so that they're ready to go in. And then the next cycle will be in August when we try to replace and turn over and so forth. So there's always something to do. If they want to get knowledge, we can give it to them. If they want to just get dirty, we can make sure they do that.
And you've really, that's your team, your core team that you're talking about, but you have always made the garden so accessible for scouts, school groups, parents can come with their children. We just asked that if you are under 18, you're with an adult.
You have to bring an adult with you.
Right.
Some of that has to do with the being underage. Some of it has to be with general concerns of abuse, which we have to always be aware of, and protecting them and making sure that their parents are comfortable with them in our sites.
And we've also had companies come out for kind of a team building type of thing to one, do a team building thing, and also to come out and help the community. So if anyone's out there listening and you have a group, especially I think during harvest time,
Especially
is when
good
we especially need people.
from 1st of August till mid-September.
Okay.
The one of the challenges that we have to face is the garden is accessible 24/7, but going in the building and bringing washed stuff in is somewhat of a challenge if it's off hours.
Right.
So we typically do our harvesting and our planting from dawn to 10 o'clock in the morning, simply to make sure we're not in the heat and that the plants get a good start so they're not burned up the first day. We've installed multiple sprinklers that we take down and put up in the course of a winter and summer, but that allows us to make sure the plants stay hydrated. So volunteers are really very important in the harvest time.
And as a volunteer yourself, how do you feel that you've been affected in any way, either by volunteering at the PNC or maybe, I know you've had many, many volunteer experiences. Why would you encourage someone to be a volunteer?
Well, I don't think you can quite duplicate the feeling of bringing something that you've grown and having a mother with 4 children say, oh, thank you. My kids never get this kind of fresh food. It makes you feel like the sweat and the hard work that you've put in is been paid back a millionfold. So if you go and harvest in the garden, you will see people from your community who are in need. And just because someone wears a suit doesn't mean they're not in need. You can't judge people, and that's an important lesson to be learned and maintained. You can't judge the people by the way they look.
No, not at all.
And the garden is a melting pot of folks in dirty clothes who come from all different walks of life and get great joy of providing food for others.
We do. And on that note, we have 30 seconds left. Gene, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
He looks wonderful right now, but he is usually in the dirt, really just doing an amazing job.
My
Gene.
wife says
Thank you
strip
for all
before
that
I
you
go in the
do.
house.
Thank you for all that you do. You've done enough. How many pounds of food, by the way, last season?
2,350.
2,350 pounds of food from our garden, and I just encourage all of you to come out to the PNC and help out in the garden, or if you have a need for food at all, please come and stop by, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.